people in corporate America do some crazy shit, and we're worried about having two partners consensually. Really?
Right.
Okay. Like, that's hurting.
You're like, have you watched the news recently?
Right, exactly.
Stop being such a fucking hypocrite.
No, I had to renegotiate the morality clause in my publishing contract with my agents.
Wow.
Well, because again, it was that same thing of where we just really had to be very specific in that clause of like what counts as an immoral thing as far as what the author does with her life,
right,
versus what are the values of the company. We just had to like really reword that section a billion times to make sure that like there was nothing that could
come back on
yeah,
you.
exactly.
If you're happy with the same old ways of dating,
If you enjoy sucking at communication,
and you have no desire to improve your romantic life, then our podcast might not be for you.
but if you want some out-of-the-box ideas to deepen your current relationships,
broaden your sexual horizons,
develop a better understanding of yourself,
or learn more about non-monogamy,
Then you've come to the right place. I'm Jase,
I'm Emily.
and I'm Dedeker.
and this is the Multiamory podcast.
I know I did, forcing me to form myself to fit.
On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we're speaking with Dr. Elizabeth Sheff. She is a researcher and the author of several books, including The Polyamorists Next Door, Stories from the Polycule, and one of my personal favorites, When Someone You Love is Polyamorous. And we had her on the show a couple years ago.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah, and we just had her back after running into her at Southwest Love Fest, and we're so excited to have this conversation to talk about all the new trends and new observations she's made about polyamorous families in this beautiful country of ours.
That was an interesting editorial note there, but
And with that, let's get to the interview.
So here we are with Dr. Elizabeth Sheff. We're so happy to have you back on the show. It's been like a good solid 2 years, I believe, since we've had you on. But we saw you actually at Southwest Love Fest. It was great to hear what you were talking about there. It was great to sit down and have an awesome drink with you. So we definitely wanted to have you back on the show. So for those of you out there, or dear listeners who don't know, can you tell us about yourself, what you do, who you are?
Yes, thanks. And thanks. It's so fun to be back. And it was really fun to see you at the Southwest Love Fest. I thought that was a really awesome conference. I had a great time. And especially for the first time, they did it.
A great
oh
job.
gosh, yeah, I think
Tucson delivered.
Definitely for
Heck
putting
yes.
it up for the
Really
first
nicely
time.
done.
Yeah,
Definitely.
totally.
Yeah.
But I'm a researcher. I'm a sociologist. I started studying polyamory in 1996
Wow.
as part of my doctoral research. And since then, have been studying it in a longitudinal study, following the same people over time. I'm in my fourth wave of data collection right now, especially talking to kids about who've grown up, so teenagers and young adults especially, about how growing up in a polyamorous family has impacted them, and talking to their parents about what it's like to age in long-term poly relationships. So it's been super interesting. I love collecting the data because it's so fascinating to check back in with people and see how their lives have changed, what's happened in the meantime.
Yeah,
Can
seriously.
you just clarify really quick, because I'm not a researcher. I don't know how many of our listeners are. I didn't know that data collection happened in waves. Can you explain that a little bit?
I know, fourth wave, and how long between each successive wave.
Right. Good idea. Yes. Most data collection doesn't happen in waves. Most research is a point in time. And that can work great for some forms of research, but for studying families, it's longitudinal, or following the same people over time, is really important to get much more of a much more than just a snapshot, much more of a holistic picture. For instance, if I had only done single snapshots, I think I wouldn't necessarily realize how common it is for when people first come out to their family members, the family can, especially if they're religious, they can really freak out, like really freak out. But if given 5 to 10 years, a good half of them calm down and interact with the family and see what it's like on a daily basis. And they're like, okay, I guess I kind of overreacted. Sometimes they even say, I'm sorry, I totally overreacted. I apologize.
That's
awesome.
And that's the kind of, yes. And, sometimes they don't. Sometimes those families are split permanently, but there's a solid chunk of them that once they calm down over time can reestablish a much more friendly and, maybe not super close, spend weeks and weeks together, but at least successfully like have a nice Thanksgiving dinner and then, have a drink and then go, maybe not. Yeah. So that's one of the benefits of longitudinal research. I've done my waves of data collection about every 5 years over the past 20 years.
Wow.
So I started the fourth wave of data collection for the 20th anniversary of the study on 2016, in 2016. And so each wave kind of takes me a long time because I'm a self-funded, actually that's another link I should have given you and will.
Oh, we'll find it. Yeah.
My Patreon page.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. People can contribute to this research if they want. It would really help me out to actually finish conducting it.
Right.
To help support the polyfamily study. That'd be great.
Right.
So
Awesome.
I'll give you that link.
Great.
Okay, so I guess the wave thing makes sense because I guess the only other alternative to actually being able to track trends over time is if you're there with a family 24/7, which I don't think anyone wants.
For 20
really.
years.
For 20 years.
Oh gosh, no.
No.
Yeah.
So I just kind of dip in and out as it were.
Yeah,
Right,
that's
right.
cool because I feel like people like in news media articles I read and stuff, there are a lot of studies that get trotted out. Like there tends to be these couple studies people mention a lot. The one that says like 20% of Americans have been in some form of open relationship at some point in their lives, and then the 5% are 4 to 5% are currently practicing some sort of non-monogamous thing. But those are, like you were saying, that's just this like at this moment in time, this is what we found out, and it doesn't really show anything about what happened to those
longevity of
people.
it. Yeah, totally.
So it is really cool and somewhat unique to find these sort of longitudinal studies.
Well, they're hard to sustain.
Yeah.
And with mine, it's been, I've had respondents that I can't find anymore.
Oh wow.
Right.
Like had people kind of drift away or I find them and contact them and they don't respond. And it's hard to know how much to pursue them, if they are really just done participating, it's not cool to harass them.
Yeah.
But if they're just spacey and might be
Which is a
interested,
possibility.
but,
Right.
like keep meaning to respond to that email. So what I've decided, and I hope it's the right thing, is that 3 times I'll email someone or contact someone 3 times. And if after that I haven't heard back from them, then I just leave them alone. And it's kind of a drag because I don't know why they won't talk to me. It would be interesting if I could just say, hey, I understand you don't want to do this anymore, but why won't you talk to me? Like you're
Right.
just in case. But
Yeah.
if they're not talking to me, they won't tell me why they won't talk to me.
I'm sure it's not about
Because they're
you.
not talking
No,
to me.
I'm sure
No,
it's
no,
not
I
about
don't mean like about me, but reasons for withdrawal from the study. I
Would
think
be good data.
That would be good
Yeah,
data. I guess
yeah.
that's true.
really
for sure.
interesting.
Yeah.
But it's when they're non-responsive, I can't force them
Yeah.
to tell.
Right.
I just quickly wanted to ask, how rare is a study like this? Are you simply the only person who's doing a study like this?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Wow. That's really
In part
special.
because it's really difficult to sustain over time. There have been longitudinal family studies which gave me the idea.
Right.
There was a study of divorce that was this longitudinal study that found shifting impacts over time, which I've also found with the kids in my samples. Sometimes when I guess I'm thinking of one kid in specific when he was, I think I talked to him when he was 15, And he was like, this sucks, man. This totally sucks. And now I think he's 23 perhaps. And he's like, yeah, I don't think the poly thing is for me, but I see everything I learned from it. And actually, while some parts of it did suck, in retrospect, I'm really glad that my family was that way. In fact, I always ask, do you wish you could have had a different family than the one you did? And everyone always says, oh, no. Even if it sucked in some ways, I'm really glad I had that family. Like, even the ones who are like, no way, totally going to be monogamous, would absolutely under no circumstances be polyamorous myself, are still glad that they had that kind of upbringing that opened their minds so much, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, when I was 15, I thought everything my family did sucked. So I understand that.
And you were right, because the world sucks when you're 15.
It's true.
Your
It
family
really
does
did.
suck,
It did.
You know, like everything sucks.
Yeah, why don't you go on to this next one here?
Oh, sure. So you've talked about these second and third generation polyamorous people that you've been seeing that like their parents were, and then their parents' parents were or something. And so you're seeing people who've been polyamorous for a long period of time, and who are second and third generation polyamorous people. So because of all that and because of your research, do you feel like the world is changing or shifting in some way, that at the very least this is going to become more prevalent, or just less taboo in society because people are starting to do it from like a family generational standpoint?
You know, I don't see a whole ton of family generational standpoint. Some people do, definitely. There are, second and third generation poly folks. Absolutely. But I don't see as much of that. Like in my sample, for instance, the kids are much more like, there are a few that are like, oh, absolutely, totally poly, but they're many more of them are maybe not. We'll see. Like it's on the menu, but they're not the champions of it. And that's what I see in the future, actually, is non-monogamy, consensual non-monogamy taking its place on the relationship menu. Much more like serial monogamy will probably be the most popular dish still on the menu. But there's all these other ways you can do it too that aren't nearly as outlandish.
Right.
And, it's like gluten-free kind of, like we'll have on the relationship menu, there'll be the non-monogamy section where you can have different versions of it and, try different ways of it at different times. And that's what my teenage and young adult respondents say, that I'll see when it works out. I'll see how it works out. I'll see what my partner wants. For now, no, I'm not doing it.
Right.
That's the most common answer. And maybe in the future, and maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I see that as a growing... I don't ever see non-monogamy replacing monogamy.
Yeah.
I think serial monogamy is going to be the long-term option for still the majority of people.
Yeah.
But I definitely see it as, kind of like, if you flip it over, or there's this special menu, here's the vegan menu or the gluten-free menu. Yes, exactly.
Excellent. I really like that metaphor for explaining, I think, to people, because I think we do get that a lot of people kind of thinking like, oh, is monogamy dying, or is it going to go out of fashion, or
a lot of people have been are fearful of that.
I think a lot of people are fearful, but I really like that metaphor of like, no, the same way that like, veganism or gluten-free or vegetarianism is obliterating people who want to eat meat or eat animal products.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
That was it was interesting. You were talking about sort of the teenagers, and they're kind of like, well, it's an option. We'll see. I don't want to do it now. I mean, that's something that we've tried to make one of the cornerstones of our show is just like, hey, this is another option.
Yeah.
It's just important to know that if you're going to be monogamous, you should do it by choice and not because you think that's the only option you have.
Yeah, being conscious about it.
Yeah. But it was also reminding me of my little sister when she was in high school. Listened to some of our podcast, and she was like, "Man, I wish it were possible to be polyamorous in my high school in the Midwest." She's like, "But I don't think that it would be." And it was funny because the thought that I had was just sort of like, yeah, don't try to do that right now.
Not right now.
I think that would be really stressful and probably, just like during a time when dating's already really stressful.
Right, when you're already trying to figure out all these things.
And I'd love it if that wasn't the case eventually, where, from the age of, you first start dating, that is an option. But I did have that thought of kind of like, man, like that's going to add a lot of stress to your dating life right now. Maybe just don't.
And yet where there are queer youth, it is often part of queerness, and there are a lot of queer youth, but they tend to be either out in large liberal cities, like LA, I'm sure, has a huge queer youth scene.
Sure.
And some poetry slams to go with it and stuff like that, so that poetry slam queer youth skater punk group,
right?
You're not monogamous too,
Yeah, totally.
But in terms of like a mainstream high school in a small town, probably not safe to be queer youth and probably not safe to be poly youth either.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Totally.
That makes sense. So I want to ask a question that was inspired by a recent, something that you wrote on Psychology Today pretty recently. And I want to talk about specifically media portrayals of poly families. So we're on the tail end of our tour, and our show on tour is all about representations of polyamory and non-monogamy in fictional media, like in TV and movies, commercials, things like that. And as a company, we are constantly hounded by producers, either producers of reality shows or news segments or documentaries or whatever, who are always trying to be like, can you put us in touch with poly families or thruples or people who are cohabiting? And I know that you are too, because
that's what you
just
do.
What you do.
It's the same story. Yes, absolutely.
And so, I guess my question is, the way that we've responded to these emails has evolved over the years. And I wanted to hear from you, like, do you think that this is something that we should be encouraging for the sake of representation and lessening stigma, or do you think like we really just got to let these people have their own freaking privacy? I know that we've kind of gone back and forth on either trying to like really help people find good, healthy examples of cohabitating poly or people raising children, and then sometimes we've gone down to just kind of the shutdown of like, you're not going to find this because people are not going to want to talk to you. But I wanted to know kind of what your take is on that in these days.
I think poly families are super gun shy of appearing on TV for very good reason. The precedent was set with April Divilbliss in the 1990s, the late 90s.
It was an MTV show,
where,
right?
Yes, she was on Real Sex or Real Life or Real something.
Not Real World? It was something else? No,
more documentarian, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Bit, yeah.
Her with her two male partners and lost custody as a result of that.
Yeah.
And people have been hesitant to go on TV with their kids since then. And I think for good reason. I have multiple times suggested to producers that if they're serious, they want these families to take this risk for them, then they should set up a legal defense fund.
Wow.
For these families.
That's
great. If you really put your money where your mouth is, and they always say, oh, no, we couldn't do that.
Right.
That's not even legally, we can't advocate on behalf of this. And then I'm like, well, I can't help you.
Right.
I also used to respond with oh, let me see, I'll put out a call, I'll see. And I don't even put the calls out anymore. No one ever responds to them.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's what we found. It's just no one wants to do
responds.
it.
But that makes so much sense to have that.
Waste my time.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to at least say that, just so that at least people learn, oh, there's actually a potential impact and risk here.
Yeah.
And maybe
Significant. Yeah.
And maybe that changes the way that we're going to approach people in the future or something like that.
I feel like there's this idea that everybody just wants to be on television and therefore they want to just like share their story and go out there and get their 15 minutes of fame. But I think what these producers don't necessarily understand is that these are people's lives and their day-to-day existence, and that's it could have really impactful, awful ramifications if somebody took it the wrong way.
Right.
I found
and not even just custody, but sometimes for the kid at school. This one parent, when I was asking around to try to get people to go on one of these shows, this parent said, you know, my kid is already kind of a geeky, awkward child. And to, you know, at 13 or whatever, to put them on national television as their parents, or not even put them on, just put their parents on.
Yeah.
People will recognize us. And, you know, do we really want to make his school life any harder than it is?
Right.
Yeah.
School life already sucks.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Middle school
When you're a
blows.
geeky 13-year-old, and what 13-year-old is not geeky?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Comes with the territory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gosh, I have seen, though, the other side of this. I was just reading an article recently that came out in some, I forget what it was, a Canadian press outlet, where they did a story. This is just written, not like a TV news thing, but they were talking about different sorts of polyamorous relationships. And in reading it, I just found myself being like these people are either brand new at this and like don't really know what they're doing, but decided they wanted to have their picture taken and like be part of this article. And I've noticed that a lot of things that I'll read and like quotes that I'll see that have pictures of this throuple all, you know, living together and showing these pictures together, and just like the things that they say and the ways they express about how they're doing it is just so clear to me that it's like, you're not really a part of the poly community yet. I can tell that you're new at this.
Interesting.
We probably said a lot of the same sorts of things, but it all comes off very trite or like somewhat combative against monogamy, or just all the stuff that you see with people when they first get excited about it.
They think
And-
all of a sudden they're so enlightened.
Or something, right? Or it's all about like how important their like one penis policy is in their relationship, or you know, just stuff that or that it's this, we just immediately went into this polyfidelitous triad and, you know, never thought I'd be into it before. These sorts of setups where I'm just like, yeah, okay, let me know in a year like how that's still going.
Right.
But that's the thing, is that the people who kind of are more in it are like, I don't want to rock the boat on this. I don't want to do this. And also the media is like, well, you're less interesting because there's less drama
it's stable,
here.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So it is this.
Or
just
maybe
tricky
you're
thing.
round, or you have gray
Exactly.
hair, or, you know, like the media wants young, super slender, attractive people.
Yeah.
And the reality of most people is, obviously not you three, you are far more attractive than the average, I would say, the three of you, certainly. But the like more mundane people just don't look that good on TV.
Right. Right.
And so they want, you know, like young, attractive people having dramatic, explosive
Yeah. Well, yeah.
interactions.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes
Yeah.
sense. But that is the other side of it, though, is that, you know, the people that I do know that are cohabiting or that are raising children and that are stable, I also know, I'm like, that's just not good TV, you know? And I think we try to tell people that now.
Folding
of like,
laundry.
exactly.
together,
It's
you know, like having a glass of wine, folding
Yeah.
the laundry.
like it's gotten to this point when people reach out and they're like, oh, we want to find thruples living together, people raising kids, that I'm kind of like, it would be so ridiculous if someone reached out and was like, we want to find a gay couple raising kids and come into their home and interview them
Yeah, and see what they are
see
like in
how
the
they
wild.
live. And
Yeah.
like, and I mean, I don't know,
What's
maybe
their furniture like?
Exactly.
I'm like, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, maybe somebody would have
Right.
done that kind of project. But now it's like, we're like, what? That's ridiculous. They're going to be sending text messages and picking the kids up from school. And that's what it's going to be like. And I feel like the media hasn't quite gotten that message quite yet, because I guess there's just enough people with enough drama to kind of keep the slow drip going. I don't know. That's just a theory.
But what's the average poly family up to? Dishes,
Yes.
bath, homework, laundry,
Right.
bed.
All the same.
Yeah.
Probably too tired for sex.
Right, right.
We're
Answering
talking about
an
it far too
email,
much. Yeah.
Watching a rerun of scandal and going to bed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, so as far as families go, so this is actually something that comes up a lot too when media outlets will reach out to us. They're always looking for what they think of as polyamorous people, which is usually a triad living together. And I know that in your studies, it's about polyfamilies. And like often when people come to us with that, one of our answers is like, okay, I understand that's what you're looking for, but just so you know, most polyamory doesn't look like that. The vast majority of people are intersecting dyads that sort of form a network, but each relationship is almost always two people. It's very rare to find those triads, and it's especially rare to find ones that last. I was curious to hear from you, because I think when people hear, oh, she researches polyfamilies, their image is like, oh, it's all these triads with kids.
Triad, yeah.
Is that true? Is that representative of who's in your study? Like, who are the actual polyfamilies out there? Or did they look a little different than that?
I can think of several co-residential triads with children, but a lot of them, I would say more, are either single parents or who are divorced. Like it used to be, I had more couples with kids dating others, and several of those like big deal couple relationships have divorced, which sent like ripples through their local poly communities.
Interesting.
And one quad lost a member and is a triad now, but there have also been several long-term triads that have lasted. So I would say there's been lots of shifting, which is actually characteristic if you look at people's family lives over 20 years.
Right. Yeah.
People sometimes die, they get divorced, they get remarried, they stay together, they have kids, the kids leave, they have other things happen, the kids come back, you know,
Right.
and the parent move in, you know, like they've got, it is characteristic of families to change across time. So the fact that these poly families are also changing across time is really not that shocking.
Yeah, definitely.
But I would say there's no single form of the poly family. I can think of a quad that is one of the strongest, most together families in this study. And, you know, people are all about quads are too unstable, quads never make it, quads never last. And it's one of the people in the quad told me one time that all you have to do is tell him not to do something and he is by God going to do that thing. And so, you know, all you got to do is tell him his quad's not going to last and by gum, that quad is, you know, going strong at like 15 years or something now. I would have to ask them again, but
That's great.
they're not, plowing along.
Well, that's the thing is that even myself, who's been in this community for like so many years now, I'm always blown away by how many different ways that people do it. Every time I think I've seen every possible way to do it, then I go to like some other meetup in another town and I'm like, wow, that's a whole new way of negotiating this. That's a whole new way of negotiating child rearing or cohabiting or just dating or sex or whatever. And which I think is wonderful and beautiful. But that I think that is the thing is like, I think that as a public, we so try to attach to like, I need one image so that I can understand this, when it's like, nah, man, like we're human
Make it hold still.
Exactly, just hold still.
All over the place. Just make it hold still in one little box.
Right. When it's like, nah, like we're human beings and we do shift and adapt and change and we're so different. And then of course, like our relationship structures are going to reflect that as well.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And I feel like that would be a really interesting story in the media if they could accept that changing their mind about what the story is they're going to tell about polyamory is like, wow, look at how these relationships can change and people can stay in each other's lives in different ways and have different connections to each other, and that not everyone has to have sex with each other to be important to each other. Like that, I think would be a really interesting story, but they just don't know that story is there to tell.
Right.
Or they're just afraid no one cares about that story. But I actually think it would be a really cool one.
For sure.
Well, I tell them that story and they're like, get back you.
Right.
Yeah, we do the same thing.
We do the same thing because we're not like a perfect little like triad that
Right,
like lives together and runs a
right.
podcast. We have this weird history that's shifted
Yeah.
and changed, and there's other partners who are like not involved with the podcast, and like that everything moves and changes and shifts, and it's the same
Yeah.
thing. It's like we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
Right, totally.
We reel them in though because we look like we could be the perfect little triad.
No,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's what gets them knocking
It's
on
a
the
male
door.
with two bitches.
Exactly.
Well, it's
a
a
man
mess
with two
because
bitches.
you are
Yeah.
so attractive. All three of them. I bet they see you and they're like, score.
Yeah, they're like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, jackpot, and then
little
you
do
know,
they
the
know.
average mere mortal poly person.
Exactly.
You
And then
three are like
disappointment.
11.
Jeez.
If this were
jeez.
Spinal Tap, you would
Oh
be at
shucks.
Oh, okay.
geez.
No,
it's true.
Let's
It's
move
true.
it. Let's move it along.
Okay. No, sure. So something that you do in addition to all of your research is that you're an expert witness. We've
Yes.
actually been getting a lot of like legal questions recently that we're not exactly fit to answer.
Right.
But have you specifically seen like how polyamory fits into a legal framework? And by that I mean like, are you seeing trends? Are you seeing any precedents being set, or anything like evolving and changing in regards to the rights that people have, or how like families can be protected, or securing parenting rights, anything along those lines?
Actually, I see a lot of
Great.
movement on that line. And first I need to say that I'm not a lawyer and this is not legal advice.
Right.
I am a sociologist, and this is exactly what you said. You identified as trends in what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
What I see is a significant shifting on the legal level of allowing 3 legal parents. That is a very big deal. And that's happening in California and in New York. Right now, there have been significant decisions in both of those states around that. And I see that just continuing, trickling in from each coast,
Yeah.
trickling down the coast and probably stopping before it reaches me. I'm in Tennessee, so I don't know about,
Yeah.
but certainly like spreading across the north. I totally see this happening in Chicago, for instance.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
wow. Cool.
Really?
totally going to happen. I don't know there's a case in Chicago, but that kind of place will absolutely be facing this within the next 5 years
Yeah.
or
Wow.
sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In part, not only because of polyamorous families, but with assisted reproduction, you can have 3 or more
Right.
people
Right.
who are biological parents.
Yes.
So the laws have just got to shift
Yeah.
to accommodate this, and they are. And I see that as going more and more, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think other laws that are slowly starting to budge and might be shifting much more so in the future, at least I hope, are laws around discrimination.
Yeah.
Right now, the primary forms of discrimination that affect polyamorous people are housing
Yeah.
discrimination
Wow.
and
Interesting.
employment discrimination.
Yeah.
So you can be, if you have too many unrelated people living in a domicile, and that means
Right.
usually 3 or more, but not servants. It's fine if they're your servants. You can have
Jeez.
as many unrelated servants as you want. You just can't live there without
did-
them.
yeah, I
hang
did
on,
not know
hang on.
that
Yeah, I have a
caveat.
question about
Is
that.
that just a Tennessee
is it-
thing?
Like, do they actually? Is there verbiage around it being servants, or is it like is it
Or
literally
is
like
it collectively enforced? That's a good question. I think that there is an exemption specifically, but who has worked on that is, I just got to give a shout out to them because they're freaking awesome. The Woodhull Sexual Freedom Alliance
yes, they
Right.
do
has
deserve. They
worked
deserve a
on
shout
this
out.
housing discrimination issue, and they have pointed out that it's only discriminating against poorer people
Yeah.
Right.
who are more likely to share housing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And because rich people can have as many servants living with them as they want in the
Wow.
servants'
Jeez.
quarters. It's only people who are not servants that they apply this against. That's what the Woodhull brief pointed out.
Sorry, that just blows my mind. It just blows my mind that we're still having this conversation in 2018 about
a lot of things
servants
in 2018
being okay.
blow my mind.
Gosh. Yeah, geez. Okay, I just had to say that.
Yeah.
And it's not everywhere. These are like municipal laws that are often selectively enforced against people the neighborhood wants to get rid of. So often targeting immigrants, for instance, or prohibiting immigrants at all, targeting fraternities and sororities. But again, just as, society is shifting and more people are having 3 parents or whatever, it's there's this housing crisis of affordable housing in the US and all over the world, where
definitely
a lot of
in
people,
LA.
even adults, have roommates. Like it's really very common for adults in their 30s and 40s and 50s to have roommates now, in a way that was a much more juvenile thing. Before, by the time you were 50, maybe you had a bachelor pad, but you lived, like on your own. Now I know so many people who cannot afford, if they own a home, they can't afford to pay the mortgage without renters living there. And if they don't own a home, they're renting a bedroom in a house or an apartment where other people live too. And that's just the reality, the economic reality. So that's too many people to evict. The laws have got to change to support society as it is, unless that's not why we have laws and policies. If we want our laws and policies to harass people and make poor people's lives difficult, then we should absolutely keep those housing laws as they are. But if we want our laws and policies to facilitate society as it is, then we got some catching up to do. Quick.
Yeah, that's an interesting conversation to have, of like, if we're having laws to maintain a status quo versus having laws to actually respond to and protect people as they are. Because this kind of starts to get away from specifically, cohabiting polyamorous people. But I've always felt that our generation in particular, since fewer of us are marrying, fewer of us are having kids, like by the time we are in our 50s and 60s, like I feel like a lot more people will be in that situation of like living together with roommates or living in a more intentional community. And that's where people are going to get their community needs fulfilled and their care fulfilled when they don't have their adult children to rely on, as though that's a foolproof plan anyway. And so I always, I always look into the future and feel like we are going to have to catch up in how we enforce these kind of laws and policies, just because of the way trends are going, that like we're not all going to have the lives that our grandparents had in retirement. We're not all going to be able to afford like a house and a lawn or a retirement home or whatever.
Or retire at all.
Or retire at all for quite a long time. That's another factor.
Yeah. Jeez.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, I guess
the second area where poly people are experiencing discrimination, and this one can be super brief, I won't go on such tangents.
Go ahead. Yeah. We got the time.
Is employment. People are definitely getting fired for even just talking about polyamory at work. Others are interpreting that as sexual harassment in a way that having, talking about your monogamously married husband or wife, the people I've spoken to in these cases are talking just on that same level. Like, it's my partners to this barbecue, and it's a story about the barbecue and not kinky sex at the barbecue, which didn't happen. It's like water cooler, it's PG, and they're still getting accused just because they said the word polyamory, this concept. The coworker felt sexually harassed, so this person was fired.
Jeez.
Interesting. So I just want to ask, because, we had a lawyer on our show who specializes in family law and works with the polyamorous community and things like that. And we talked to him a lot about employment discrimination and employment rights. And he, his stance was kind of like, yeah, it happens, but at the same time, we don't see a lot of people getting fired, if they have an affair or whatever. And so,
exactly,
maybe we need to be not as worried about it. But then at the same time, all three of us individually have personal lived experiences of experiencing either discrimination or being let go for a job or being passed for a job or creating at least some kind of really awkward workplace tension because of that. So I'm kind of curious of what is it that you've seen in your studies regarding this specifically? I mean, I know you just kind of told the whole barbecue story. But if there's
Right,
anything
right.
comparable to that.
That person was more contacting me as a legal client rather
wow.
than
I see.
a member of my studies. So
Right.
I blended that information.
Well, I mean, in your
Um,
professional experience, I guess, not just the study.
yes, that it's people often who will be, it's either coworkers who get uptight about it and have a vendetta and, like get that person fired because the
Jeez.
coworker is like, not only do I not want to be polyamorous, but I don't want anybody else to be polyamorous, and I'm going to make your life hard because you are.
Yeah.
Right.
Or there are sometimes, now I'm blanking on the word, morality clauses
Right.
in
Yes.
employment contracts, which again are very enforced,
Right.
very selectively. Like people in corporate America do some crazy shit, and we're worried about having two partners consensually. Really?
Right.
Okay. Like
Yeah.
that's hurting.
You're like,
This
have you watched the news recently?
Yeah.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
just stop being such a
exactly.
fucking hypocrite.
No, I had to
Totally.
renegotiate the morality clause in my publishing contract with
Wow.
my
Really?
agents.
Wow.
Well, because again, it was that same thing of where we just really had to be very specific in that clause of like what counts as an immoral thing as far as what the author does with her life
Right.
versus what are the values of the company. We just had to like really reword that section a billion times to make sure that like there was nothing that could
Wow.
come up.
come back
Wow.
on
Yeah,
you.
exactly. I know.
So
right? I
exhausting
know.
and unnecessary. Come on.
Yeah, jeez.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
No, I mean, I feel very fortunate now that I'm at a company where that's not a concern for me. Like I can be out at work and talk with people about it. And I try not to bring it up too much, unless someone else
Right.
asks me about it or something, or if I mention the podcast or something. But in the example of the time where I was passed up for a job was not because the owners cared at all, but because a guy who worked there was upset about it and
Jeez.
made us think about it. Well, this was at the job where you were. What's his name? We won't say his name on the show. But where he got really upset about the
okay.
fact that I was polyamorous with Emily
Okay.
and made such a stink about it that I just sort of like the calls from the owners as we were like ready to start me working there just kind of stopped.
Oh man.
But it reminded me of something that we talk about a lot on this show that I believe comes from you, which is the phrase fear of the polyamorous possibility.
Yes.
Which I love that phrasing. I think it's brilliant, which is why we mention it so often. But
Cool.
it is that, and I think that's where we're getting to something, and I'd like to hear your opinions on this as well, but that idea that if someone cheats on their spouse, it's kind of like, well, you suck, or like you made a mistake either by getting caught or by doing it, depending on your point of view. Whereas with polyamory, there is that thing of like people can be so personally upset by you doing polyamory because it raises questions in their mind about how they live their life. Right? It's like the thought that there could be another way to do it is too threatening to all the sacrifices I've made in my life to live it the only way I think it's possible to live it. That's why I'm so angry. That's why I'm so upset. And that's why I need you to get fired. Or
Right.
I must have to come up with some way to show that you're immoral or that you're, somehow doing something wrong here or sexually harassing me or whatever. I was just curious. I mean, does that seem kind of in line with what you were seeing when you...
Absolutely.
Kinda called
Absolutely. And I think it's often people who have issues around infidelity that
Yeah.
react so strongly. Either in their families of origin, one of their parents cheated on the other, and that made family life incredibly painful, or they were in on this terrible secret, or everyone
Yeah.
knew and mom was humiliated, or the family got divorced and dad that asshole, we hate him now, or
Right.
or they are cheating and they don't want their partner to get ideas about also having other partners. They want the option themselves, but not to extend it
Right.
to their
Yeah.
partners, or they've been cheated on.
Yeah.
And they're like, nope, this is wrong. People who want multiple partners are
That's
just bad
cheating.
people.
Yeah.
Right.
And we should do something about those bad people. And that's the part, I mean, I understand the feeling of not wanting to be polyamorous yourself. I absolutely get that. I think polyamory is not for everyone. In fact, it's probably not for the majority of people. So I am not at all invested in everyone being polyamory. Certainly not being
certainly
polyamorous.
Neither are we.
Yeah.
Just to clarify for anyone
Right.
listening out there.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Most poly people are like, do you? But that's the thing. Do you? My own life is so exhausting. I cannot imagine trying to like tell someone else what kind of sex they could have. Like, I think I would get my bathroom clean first before I start like meddling with other people's sex lives.
Yeah.
I really don't understand. Some people put so much time and effort and focus and energy into that, and it just seems mystifying to me. I truly, on a deep level, do not get it at all. Why they would put that much effort
Likewise.
into that. Not wanting it themselves, sure.
Right.
Making sure you don't get a job? Really? Come on.
Yeah. We're going to take a quick break to tell you about all the best ways that you can support this show. If you've been listening for a while, or maybe not a while, we recently on tour met some people who were like, I started listening to you yesterday, and then
I've
came
listened
to
to
your
like
show.
30 episodes
I know,
already.
I've binged like 12 hours of you, and I'm like, why? But that's cool.
Thank you.
Anyway, if you're one of those people, and you get value out of the show, the best way that you can support us and help to make sure that this show keeps going is to support us on Patreon. So if you go to patreon.com/multiamory, you can become one of our Patreon supporters, or one of our patros, as we love to call them.
Yes.
So we have a variety of incentives for each level. You know, you can donate as little as $1 a month, 25 cents a podcast. That's totally fine. Or you can upgrade to $1.25 a podcast at $5 a month and become part of our private patron-only Facebook group, which has been a fantastic discussion group for people to reach out with their problems, or if they're having a rough day, or if they just kind of want to process something that just happened in their life or their relationships. It's a really nice, supportive community that's there. If you pledge at $7 a month, you get access to that, including episodes that come out for you a day early, and they're also ad-free. At $9 a month, you get access to our private video discussion group that happens once a month, which is also great. And then at $15 a month, you get all that, and we love you, and you get a thank you video, and you're our best friend. Yes. So what's not to lose? Go to patreon.com/multiamory to sign up today.
The next thing that you can do, if you already are a patron, or if you just don't have the money to spend or don't want to do that yet, we would love it if you could take a moment to write us a review on iTunes or on Stitcher. It honestly does help us a lot. We ask for it on every episode because it is really huge for us. We don't get a ton of word of mouth because not everyone's out about being polyamorous. So writing a review really helps those people who just want these sorts of resources and aren't sure where to go, aren't sure where to turn for information about relationships that don't look like the stuff Dr. Drew talks about. So by writing a review, you help people to find that, help them to know what they're getting, help us to show up higher in search results. And you're also wonderful and also our best friend. So really win-win all around.
All the best friends.
Exactly. And we wanted to give a shout out to the wonderful people at Whimsy Protocol. We met them at Southwest Love Fest. They are Tucson natives, which is where I'm from, so they hold a special place in my heart, especially. I also purchased one of their bags when we were there. I threw up a picture of it on Instagram because I love it so much. And these are awesome people. They are queer and polyamorous, and they hand make beautiful leather goods. So leather bags and wallets. They can do custom things for you. You can find them at Etsy.com. Also, if you search their Twitter, Whimsy Protocol, and also Instagram, Whimsy Protocol, you will find them.
And just in the time that I've spent with Emily, I've seen her get so many compliments on this bag and the matching wallet that goes with it. Just random people being like, oh my gosh, I just noticed that your bag and your wallet match each other.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, they're so cool. It's really awesome
They
stuff.
do a lot of stuff with custom stitching with like the gay pride colors or the bi pride colors or things like that. They definitely kind of, I think, try to put out a line of stuff that is very indicative of they're pro queer, pro poly, pro
Yeah.
alternative sexuality kind of.
And I'm
stance.
also partial because they did mention that they actually use stuff they get from our podcast to run their business.
Oh, really?
They're like-
How cool.
They're like, because the stuff you talk about for relationships applies to any relationship,
Heck
including
yes.
our business relationship with each other.
Oh, wow.
Which is really, really cool.
Yeah, that's
really cool.
fantastic.
So
Yeah, so if you're in need of a new bag that's super awesome and custom, go to Whimsy Protocol on Etsy, or find like specific pictures of their work on their Instagram or their Twitter, and definitely get one of their amazing bags. Now back to you, Eli.
to go back to your study a little bit, I was just curious, in this fourth wave now, you've been doing this fourth wave for a couple years already. I was just curious because I'm sure a book's going to come out in the near future that's going to include all of this.
Another book.
Your last two books have been these really great insights into the way polyfamilies work and like the reality of that. And I did want to say real quick, I recommend When Someone You Love Is Polyamorous to everybody.
Yeah,
I'm glad to hear that.
I
Yay.
think it doesn't get talked about a lot, but I freaking love that book because it's just so
yay.
short, sums it up in this really non-threatening way.
It's so efficient. I think that's just the fact that it's like so short. And I mean, obviously I wrote a really long book, so it's not like I hate long books or anything like that. But I think it's just that it's like so accessible.
Yeah.
I think to so many people.
Yeah.
It's great.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. Yay.
But my question, sorry, I got off track there. My question was about, can you give us sort of a sneak preview of kind of anything that you've been seeing in this wave of collecting data that we'll probably read more about in your book when that comes out?
Let's see. So a highlight from the kids is this resilience, this emotional resilience. They feel like they develop. That when they move out from home, like if they move to go away to college or something like that, they feel like they have the skills, the personal and emotional skills to develop a network of intimates, like redevelop a support network wherever they go. And sometimes they see their peers, for instance, living in the dorms with just no clue how to self-regulate, how to make friends, how to develop an intimacy, like develop intimacy with new people, emotional support, how to even like regulate the way they spend money or do laundry or eat food. And the kids from poly families, even though they've had a lot of adult attention over their lives, it hasn't been that much helicopter parenting. It's been much more like, we communicate, we tell each other the truth, and there are consequences for your actions. So if I tell you 11-year-old, 12-year-old that I think you should bring a coat because it's going to get cold today, and you don't bring a coat, then it turns out you're cold.
Right.
Who knew? So they're not the parents who like sneak the coat and carry it for the kid and then pull it out when the kid is cold. They're like, yeah, you're cold. Who knew? So by the time they're 18, they're like, if I spend every cent I have by the 5th of the month, then I'm not going to eat for 25 days. Boy, that's a bummer. Maybe I'll still have, or maybe I'll get this and buy 12 cases of top ramen as an investment.
Right.
And then I'll know I can always fall back on that. Like they're more practical
Interesting.
in a way from not having had helicopter parents.
Yeah.
I really think.
Do you think that the trend of there being less helicoptering with the parenting, do you think that's a result of the child raising labor being split among more parents, possibly? I'm kind of just shooting in the dark here. I have no idea.
Yeah, I had that
Seems
same
like
thought.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's that also the adults are interacting a lot. So the kids are kind of around, but they're not necessarily the sole focus of the family. And often it's not like the parents have to use the kids to avoid each other, because if they're dating, they're, like going out and doing things, or there's much less avoidance in a family where you can talk about things. Like it's okay to ask questions and talk about things and bring things up. You don't get in trouble for that. So the parents can be more comfortable around each other. I think it's also a function of wanting private time sometimes from the kids and saying, okay, kids, like I have had multiple children report that they look back very fondly on when their parents metamor would come over, or their girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, and bring their kids, because the adults would disappear behind closed doors, but before they went, they would be like, here are 12 frozen pizzas, 6 chocolate bars, here's all the remotes, you can have unlimited screen time, do not bother us for 5 hours unless something's on fire.
Right.
Yeah.
If someone is bleeding, hold the limb up and press, so they're like, we have things to do, we have orgasms to have,
Yeah.
and we want to go do them somewhere else without you bothering us.
Yeah.
So
Right.
you get the run of the living room or the basement or something, and we are going to go have adult time.
Yeah,
Right.
that's great.
Interesting. That's a good segue into something that I wanted to ask, because I get a number of clients who come to me, people who have, usually it's like people who have children, either with their current partner that they're living with or maybe with an ex-partner, and usually the children don't know that mom or dad are dating or getting into polyamory or some kind of open relationship, and everyone's very, very stressed about how do they tell their children. Do they tell their children? Should they tell their children? But most importantly, how? And I know that at Southwest Love Fest, your presentation, you talked about children having different reactions to their parents' behavior depending on their age. And I would love if you don't, if you don't mind kind of briefly going through that and what you saw.
Sure. Yes. Very small children definitely do not need to know. They do not understand sex. They don't really get what adults do after they go to bed at 8 p.m. So the adults can get up to all sorts of stuff that their 2-year-old just doesn't know 2-year-old needs to know about or could understand.
Right.
5 and 6-year-olds often really do not understand that. Like it can take well into teens before kids start putting that kind of thing together.
Right.
Well,
So
kind
let
of
them be
like
small children.
before that, it's the world revolves around me, and if you're not doing something for me, then I don't
care.
care.
Yes.
Right, exactly.
Irrelevant.
Do you have ice cream?
Yeah,
Right.
Will you sit on the floor and play Legos?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I dress you up?
Yeah.
Can I smear makeup on your face? Awesome. Like kissing stuff I don't want to hear about.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of how kids think about it, is the kissing thing. And they're like, that's
Blech.
gross over there. I would say for many parents in my research, a lot of them who've had children born into a polyamorous family just wait for the kid to notice the family is different and say, hey, what's up with this? Unless it comes up naturally. And then, sure, yeah, go ahead and explain it, giving age appropriate and limited information. Most kids don't want to hear about sex. Young, like tweens and teens, want to hear that their parents are hanging out. That's all that's the language to use, and don't elaborate. You can tell small children that this is your friend, maybe even a special friend, possibly a kissing friend, and leave it at that.
I'm gonna start referring to you as my kissing
kissing
friend.
friend.
I like
This is
that.
my kissing friend, Dedeker.
The important thing when you're talking to kids about polyamory is just to be matter of fact about it, not make it into a huge big deal like, I have something to tell you. It's more like, hey, so this is, I just want you to know, your dad and I see other people and we both know about it. It's not a secret. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask us. And I just, there's no secret. We're not hiding anything from each other, and you don't have to feel like something weird is happening. So if you have questions, go ahead and ask us. And otherwise, falls in your court. Here's the minimal of information, and I will respond to more if you want.
Right.
Yeah.
It reminds me actually of another question that I think I get pretty frequently from people who have kids. And a lot of people always ask, when is the right time to introduce a new partner to my child? You know, when is too soon? When is too late? And then it's going to be weird that like I have this 5-year relationship that my kid's never known about or whatever. Or when is it, you know, is 6 months too soon? Or like, I don't know, maybe this person's not going to stick around or not. Like, do you have any insight about that?
I would say, when do you introduce other people just in your social environment? Treat the partner like you treat other people.
That's
Interesting.
Because it's not that important to the kid who you're having sex with, like they'd rather not know, then if this is someone you would just have over for dinner and game night or go see a drive-in with or whatever, introduce them like that. Like, hey, our friend's coming to the drive-in. Our friend's coming over for dinner. They're going to come play games with us, or we're all going bowling together. And you don't have to put a big label on it. They can just be part of the natural social environment. And it also puts a lot less stress on them having things go well with the kid, because you know, talk about like the stress for the polyamorous partner coming into like, oh, is this 14-year-old gonna like me? You know, no, 14-year-olds don't like anyone, so they're not gonna like you, but maybe they'll like, you know, maybe you'll be their awesome bowling buddy that they can finally 3 years later say, hey, I don't want to talk to dad about this, but condoms give me this weird rash and I don't know what to do about it. Help, you know, and you'll be that pal who, you know, you've known for 3 years since the bowling alley. And
be relationship anarchist about it.
Well, I just feel like so much polyamory advice comes down to like, what would you do with friends or coworkers or other relationships? Like, why do we have to hold relationships with people that we have the potential to have sex with in this whole other category?
Yeah.
Because I do love that too, because it's also, people say, oh, I don't want to introduce them to my kids because what if they don't stick around or it doesn't last? And it's like, well, you wouldn't think that about, oh, a coworker came over for dinner. What if my kid never sees them again after this? They're going to think, like, it's
they
that.
wouldn't give a shit.
It's just, we treat it so differently.
Interesting.
Right.
I think because we're so wired into this idea of like, dating is for the purpose of getting married, and that's it.
And like becoming a co-parent or in some way. Interesting.
So, okay, you're about to go on a tour. So what is that? What is this tour? Like, can you tell us a little bit about it? And it is going to be for a long time in a lot of different places in the country. Yeah.
Woohoo. I'm doing the Practical Non-Monogamy Tour, and it generally, in each place I have 2 series of workshops that I do. One for just people in the community who have questions about polyamory, kinky sex, non-monogamy, and just want information and the ability to ask questions of an expert, and you know, like be in a group with other people thinking and talking about the same thing and have a conversation about it.
Right.
The other set of workshops is for counselors and therapists, and they offer continuing education units certified through ASECT, which is the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists.
Wow.
So, lay people or like non-therapists, non-counselors can come to those as well. So they're not only for therapists, they might really be interesting for other people too. But the community workshops don't give any continuing education credits. The ones that are targeted for just people who are interested, like, how does this affect my life?
Right.
You know, not how do I get training to help clients deal with consensual non-monogamy. And part of the training for therapists actually is to help them think through any internalized compulsory monogamy they have, because research shows that when poly people go to therapists who shame them for being polyamorous or focus only on the polyamory as the problem and can't get past to look at other things that the client is trying to emphasize, things like that has a negative outcome for the client in therapy. So if people can kind of deal with some of their own reactions to polyamory and kinky sex before they're in front of a client and get some information and think it through, it can really help them be more effective in their therapy, counseling, and good for coaches too, relationship coaches.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely, I mean, that's training that's so needed. And I think especially you talk about kind of diving into the nuances of what's your own internalized compulsory monogamy thing. I think about the fact that like a couple years back when I was kind of trying to find a therapist, specifically a couples therapist, that I found all these people who were like poly-friendly, 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 but then I found the one therapist who on her website mentioned like I'm poly-friendly for this wide variety of relationship types, like a relationship anarchist,
Oh, wow.
non-hierarchical polyamory, hierarchical polyamory, monogamish, like, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is the person I'm going to go with because I know that this therapist understands that there's all these different ways to do it.
Right.
And there's not going to be some kind of weird agenda about like what they think polyamory is or what they think it should be. And so I think that like that training that brings like such a more expansive conversation to it other than just like some of your clients might sleep around and that's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And most, especially family therapy programs, are not teaching about
Right.
polyamory.
sure.
So I don't know where these people would get this education if they're
Right.
not getting it in their programs.
Right.
And often the family therapy programs actively say that any kind of non-monogamy is corrosive to intimacy.
Wow.
So as a counselor, you've got to shut that shit down and here's how to do it.
Jeez.
Right.
So they've been marinated in
Yeah.
pro-monogamy as the only right way to have intimacy.
Yeah.
And if there's any non-monogamy, it's a signal of a problem.
Yeah.
But not for some clients, like for some clients, yes, non-monogamy is a signal of a problem.
Definitely.
Cheating sucks,
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
especially if you're the one that gets cheated on.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
Problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you also tell us, so you're in this fourth wave of research, who are you looking for now for the study? Are you looking for more participants? What is that if people are thinking, oh my gosh, I would like to be involved with this?
Yeah.
Right now, I'm focused on if there are more people out there who've been raised by polyamorous families or any form of consensual non-monogamy. So if you're in your, if you're older than 10 years old and could have some serious, or even, like a teenager or a young adult, that would be ideal. That's going to be the rest of this year, focusing on that. Then I'm going to be in Zurich for the winter,
Wow.
teaching at the University of Zurich a class on polyamory.
Nice.
Fantastic.
And then when I get back, I think I want to finish up with the data collection on aging people. And it would be interesting for me to have very aged people. I've interviewed some elders in the polyamorous community, certainly, but a lot of my respondents in my study, the people I've been following over time, they're like the end of the baby boom, the very end of the baby boom, and Gen X is kind of that. So they're not like in their 80s.
Right.
Yeah.
I would be very interested in how polyamory looks in your 80s. They're more like in their 40s to 60s, and they're like, oh, we're not as interested in sex as we used to be. We're glad that, like if someone dies, we have each other to hold on to.
Yeah.
One thing that struck me about that generation of respondents actually is that recession in 2008
Yeah.
just tanked a lot of them. And they have not recovered financially.
Jeez.
I had one person in this last round of data collection tell me that he was in much better shape financially when he was 20 than he was at 50. He was just turning 50 and freaking out about it. Like,
Right.
I don't have any money. I lost my house. I'm back in this other house. But like and getting through those challenging financial periods, metamors make all the difference in multiple cases. Like that guy who was freaking out about turning 50 was only able to get into this other house because his metamor had let him and his wife and their kids live for free in this house for like a year and a half.
Wow.
So they were able to rebuild their lives and then they were able to go out and get their own place. But without that assistance,
Wow.
they probably wouldn't have been homeless, but they probably would have been in much worse shape.
Yeah,
certainly.
Jeez.
Right. Well, that's just a testament to like having intimate community, which I
Yeah.
think regardless of your relationship format is something that is so important for each of us to bear in mind
Yeah.
going into the
Totally.
future. Yeah.
Yeah.
for sure.
So for people who want to learn more about your work, they want to find your books, they want to be involved in your studies, they want to learn about your tour, where they can see you, where can they go to find out all that information?
So you can check out elizabethsheff.com. And my first name is spelled with an S, not a Z, elizabethsheff.com.
Great.
That's a great place to start. I blog on Psychology Today. My last name is Sheff, if you want to search for me there. You can also support the Polyamorous Family Study on Patreon, and I'll definitely provide you with a link for that.
Yeah. All these will
The
be in our show
Practical
description too.
Non-monogamy tour
Hmm.
is where you can look for me there on Squarespace. And on Twitter, I'm at Dr. Eli Sheff.
Dr. Eli Sheff. All right. Yeah.
Nice.
Well, we'll put, and I assume that from your website, they can find all these other things too, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll have links to those in the show description for this. So if
Yeah.
you're listening and you want to do that, check the show notes, find those links, and go support all the awesome work that Dr. Eli Sheff is doing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for coming back on our show. We really
Thanks for
appreciate
having
it.
me.
Yeah.
And congratulations on your recent return from your world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was
a lot
great.
of fun.
Yeah. So that was an amazing interview with Eli. It was so
Yeah.
great to have
That
her
was
back
great.
on again. And hopefully in like another 2 years, she'll have even more things to say. So we'll have her back on
Yeah.
again.
Definitely.
So if you would like to have your question or comment played on the show, you can call 678-MULTI-05 and leave us a voicemail, or you can send us an audio message at the Multiamory Facebook page. You can also email us at info@multiamory.com or send us a message on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. To support our show and join our private Facebook community, go to patreon.com/multiamory. Multiamory is created and produced by Jase Lindgren, Dedeker Winston, and me, Emily Matlack. Our episodes are edited by Mauricio. Our social media wizard is Will McMillan. Our theme song is Forms I Know I Did by Josh and Anand from the Fractal Cave EP. The full transcript is available on this episode's page on multiamory.com.
Hey, this is Dan Savage from the Savage Lovecast and Savage Love. You're listening to a Swing Set podcast at Swing Set FM.